Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Chris Dew with E1, and I'm excited that you're joining me today to talk about this next topic in our Smart List Trek series. And this one, I think, is really an interesting and fascinating and critical part of this whole mix because we're talking about how do we access Dynamics GP data and how do we do it securely when we're accessing it from PopDoc, which is hosted in Azure. So that's the title of what we're getting into today. So let's dig into what a couple of areas I want to cover. We're going to talk about some of the ways you can do it with a direct connection. We're going to talk about using our Dynamics GP gateway, and then we'll get into a couple of other options as well, just so we have a full discussion on the ways that you can accomplish this. And then we'll also talk about how you can set up security and add additional layers as well. So we're going to jump right in today, and some of this is going to get pretty technical and deep. We're going to get it right into some installs and everything. So I want to make sure that we're getting through it and not lollygagging about. So let's start with the first one that we talked about: a direct connection to your server. Right? Again, at the end of the day, if we talk about what are we trying to accomplish, we have PopDoc, which is hosted in Azure services, which is the cloud, right? And now we're talking about how do you open up your GP data, which is in most cases is going to be sitting on premise somewhere. So that is the conundrum that we're trying to talk about today. So the first option that comes up is it can be done this way. And this is probably not the way that is my preferred way, but I want to get it out there so you recognize it is an option. So if we look at this one, there's mainly two areas, right? This is something that, again, for years, people have tried to keep people out of their networks, and this is now kind of flipping that paradigm, saying, hey, I actually want to allow this specific application. So how do we lock it down? Because as you open up a SQL port, then you also only want to allow PopDoc in. So this is where getting into something called whitelisting of IP addresses. So in your network's firewall, you basically would say, hey, there's two IP addresses that PopDoc has. How do I only allow the calls made from PopDoc to be able to access that GP data? So that's what we're gonna start with today. So let me go to my other screen here. Okay, if we go inside a PopDoc, and if we wanted to add a brand new Dynamics GP connector, we can do that by going to connectors. And under this section, we hit add connector. Now again, you see there's a whole host of other connectors, but today we're just focused on this GP one because we're focused on the GP connector. But when I go into here, you'll see it defaults to a SQL Server login, right? This is basically saying I need to have a connection open from PopDoc, which is hosted in the cloud, into your internal system. So again, we have to be able to access that SQL Server remotely. I have to have, if it's on a port other than 1433, which it can be, right? It can be on any port. You specify where that's at, you specify your Dynamics database, and then you specify the user that will be hooking into it. But what I want to show you a couple of other options that we're going to get into in just a second in detail. So the first one, I'll just mention this one real quickly because sample data, this is if you are just getting started with PopDoc and want to see some GP data, but you don't necessarily have the connections open to your server, this is a great way to get started so you can hit my server that has been set up for your demonstration purposes, and you can connect to it and again start running those smart lists and seeing how it works. But we're going to start getting into the other areas today. So after we move on beyond direct connection, again, direct connection does work. It's just for some people, it's still a security concern. They just don't want to be poking, or allowing any direct access to the SQL Server. So this brings up the second thing we're going to be talking about, and this is a gateway that we have for PopDoc, and it's called the Dynamics GP Gateway. So it's very specifically designed to hook into all the same things that we would do from the cloud. So if you can kind of think of it this way, here's the beautiful part about this. It is essentially the same service that is running in our Azure environment, but you're now putting it on your environment so that you're controlling the access to your server. So what does this get you? This basically allows us to install the gateway, and it doesn't have to be on your SQL server, right? It can be on a totally separate server, so that can help you segment that network, or again, separate it. That is one thing that it does for you. Additionally, again, it provides you're providing a service account, if you will, so that you're saying only that account maybe only has read access to that database. So that's all kind of hidden. But again, the beautiful part is no matter what option you choose inside of PopDoc to hook into it, it is essentially calling the same equivalent of that web service. So it's behaving the same way. And the other part that I love is that it actually isn't, from what we've seen, it isn't any slower. Even though it has, maybe one more hop to get into it through your network, we found that as long as you have adequate hardware, that we haven't had any performance issues, which is what's really nice. The second part that I'll just mention here is that, again, we still have people that just want to lock it down. And so you can lock down those IP addresses so that it's just down to this 2 that we provide in our knowledge base article. And again, not everybody else can call into it. So let's dig into this one, because there's a few things that we're going to spend a bit more time on this, since this is probably the preferred method. There's a couple of different ways we can do it. One, we can do it with just a token. And so basically it's asking for 2 pieces of information. One, where is this gateway installed? And number 2, what is the token that's going to be used for the authentication? The other way, the other gateway, is with basic authentication. And I'll maybe say this a slightly different way. What this does is it still requires the gateway wherever it's installed, but it basically allows you to put 2 pieces of information in there. So it can be even additionally more secure if you'd like to do it that way. So anyway, I wanted to show you that, but let's do this now. We're gonna go right inside of the wizard where you would do an installation. And I'll point out there's a KB article that we have that covers really all these steps. So this is something that you don't need to get caught up in the details. I just wanted to make it as a point of discussion today. But in order to enable this secure access to this GP data that you control now, is we run through this this wizard, if you will, or setup. And basically, it's really simple. It says, where is your SQL server? So again, like I said, this does not have to be on your SQL server. This is essentially creating a web service that calls your SQL server, but it can be on anywhere on your network. So my SQL server is demo1 SQL. It's asking where my Dynamics database is. And so I happen to have mine called GP Dynamics. And then it says, what username and password do you want to use? Now, the next thing I'm going to do is probably not the best way of doing it. I'm going to use the SA user, but I would probably encourage you to use a user that only has read access and only has access to the databases that you want them to have access to. So I think that's kind of a key point to mention in there. But then this next option you'll get is, do you want it to be token or basic authentication? For our example today, I'm only going to go through the token option, but basically the basic one will prompt you for what you want your username value to be and a password value, whereas this one is just a token value, so just one. Now, you can make this, and I would encourage you to do this. I would encourage you to make this a much longer string, and maybe something that isn't easily guessable. So, use 64 characters, right? Make them all, make them all sorts of uppercase and lowercase and numbers and special symbols and stuff like that. So I would encourage you to do that. But for my example today, I'm actually just going to use ABC to hook into this sample data. And then that's really all we needed to do to put the gateway out there. There's a second part, however, and this is again documented in that in what I have placed out there, or I'll bring it up in just a second, the KB article. But what I wanted to show you is that now the second part is enabling the web service to utilize that. And so I'll actually just create a brand new one for this example. Very quickly, all we got to do is we have to add this application pool. So I'm just going to call this secure GP. Okay, and then you'll see you'll have your websites under your IIS directory. Now, I'm going to put mine in the default website. You could have it on, if you have different ones as well, you can put it there. But we'll just actually add one into this existing website here. So if I go ahead and hit add an application, and again, don't get caught up in this. This is all documented. I just want you to understand that there's a few steps to ensure that we're locking this down securely. So what did I call it? Secure GP. I'm going to choose that application pool that was just created. Okay, and then you browse out to where the files were placed. And so in this case, they got placed into program files, x86, popdoc, and then you'll see I've installed this just a couple times here. So we'll point to this one and then hit OK. So that's really all we need to do. And now we will have a gateway that can be utilized externally. So how do you test that? Well, one of the first things that you can test, and I'll just pull up, there we go, this one right here. You can choose to browse to it. So what this will do is it will browse to it locally. So we'll give it a second to spin up. But we're going to talk about, again, this is only proving that we have it working on this particular box. And I've made it HTTPS required. So just for the sake of showing you this, okay, maybe I'll do it a different way. Here's what we're going to do here. Then we are going to, I'm just going to take you to what the actual external site is, and then we'll talk about that. I was going to do that in the next section here. Oh, what do I got going on? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Okay, there we go. What you'll get is a message, something like this, when you have it being accessible externally. So now this is an externally accessible site that I can hook into, and we can now utilize if we go back to if we go back to basically where we have the configuration. Now, one thing I'm not going to spend the time on today, but I think this is really important. I am going to highly recommend that you use SSL for this data encryption. Again, that's another layer of providing a secure mechanism to access that data. We have had people that have chosen to not set that up. I just would be very cautious to have you do that. So I highly recommend that you are using a publicly signed SSL certificate to ensure the integrity of that data. Okay, but if we go back here now, and we now have our gateway URL, and then the token. Remember, I did a bad thing. I did ABC, but that should be enough for me to actually be able to utilize that. And so now, what this is doing, right? It didn't ask me for any of my credentials to SQL Server. It said, hey, whatever you have set up on your side of things on the gateway is what we're going to be utilizing to hook into that data. So if we look at this, we should have another GP installing. There we go. This one has 93 lists. So it's cranking its way through. So what I might do just for a second, I'm going to show you another connector that I have in here that is already using the gateway, and just show you that really we're seeing really good performance. So again, there's 1,000 records that came back in a split second, right? Even if we did something like, well, let's see, how many do I have? I might have, well, okay, you know what? We'll do something crazy here. Even through the gateway, I'm going to pull back 100,000 GL transactions. Oop, that was 10. That looks like that was 10,000. Okay, 10,000 was really fast. This will take probably closer to 30 seconds. But what you'll see is even through the gateway, we're able to pull back data from GP way faster than you could just with your traditional smart lists. And again, we're doing it in a secure manner. So we'll just let that, well, we're kind of hammering that server now, since we're actually also getting all the metadata for it, getting everything from the smart lists and favorites and all those things. Okay, there we go. In about 30 seconds, we just pulled back 100,000 transactions. That would have probably taken 15 minutes with just a smart list. So this is one of those things that's really, really handy to be able to use. Okay, so since we're in here, I want to show one other area, right? We have this page on our site on the on-premise data with gateways, and so you can see you can click on here, and you can see how it works. And I think another thing that's important is we're talking about GP, but there are a couple of other ones if you're doing some other system as well, or just more of a generic one. But they work very, very similar. So if you go into there and look at this GP one, this is what I was talking about. We actually have all of the information. So kind of the wizard, we talk through all of those options that you might want to utilize in there. So you're not stuck on doing this on your own. All right, let's see where we're at. If we go back to the connector install, we'll just look at it real quickly. Okay, it looks like it's just towards the end. It's installing all the favorites and details, so it's almost done in just a couple minutes. Let's do this while we're waiting for that to wrap up. I want to go back to here very quickly and just mention just maybe a couple more things on this. And again, just kind of a visual, what is this really accomplishing? It basically allows us to point to that GP data, and then the other part that we're not maybe focusing on today, but we can make that accessible wherever. So if it's in that portal or the web application that we just showed you, that's awesome. If you're embedding it inside of a CRM system or Salesforce system, or maybe some other cloud-based application, this gateway will enable you to share that GP data with other people without necessarily needing to do an integration each time. Okay, I think it's fair that we talk about are there any other options out there? Again, you presented the first one of the direct connection and locking it down via whitelisting the IPs. We talked about a gateway where we install that and lock it down once again with those IPs, even just to make it further secure. And again, we talked about SSL and some of those things to make it secure, that we're communicating with that data securely. But what else is out there for me? So there are a couple people that will choose to move their entire GP database from on-premise to an Azure SQL. Now there's some other ramifications, right? Whether it's performance and some of those things that you may have to work through with your partner, but there is potentially some options there. There's another thing I'll just mention. There's probably more than the one I have down here, but we have done some work with the Power GP team, and they basically have a GP out there, and what they have done is they've essentially written their own API. So instead of hooking into their SQL servers directly, we're hooking into their API with their authentication methods instead. So this is essentially kind of another form of a gateway that they've done specifically for themselves, but it is one of those options I thought that is pertinent to bring up, because there are more and more people that want to find other ways of providing a secure access. Okay. I just wanted to bring up this topic because some of you may be asking about it, and I haven't even looked at the questions yet. But one of the things people are saying, okay, it's great. I want to hook into GP data, but I'm really only doing it because I want to archive it, right? Maybe I'm moving to another system, or maybe I want it for access to do some fast reports because I have millions and millions of records. So that is something that I'm not going to get into on this subject today. But if you, one of the next slides I show you, will show you there's 2 more sessions that are coming, and we are going to be talking about how do we access historical GP data there. So just wanted to bring that up. Okay, here is one more area I wanted to get into though, and that is how do we provide additional levels of security? Because like we're sharing that with a service level account, but how do I go now and say, hey, this user can access payroll lists, and this one can access my custom smart list, and this one can do this. So we have some additional ways to lock down that data and only let specific people access. So let's get into that topic right now. If we go back into this connector, and we can see that GP11 has completed installing. So if we go ahead and look at this now, we'll see a couple of things. We'll see here's all of our lists that are inside of here. So again, all the standard ones and maybe some extra ones that we put in there. But not just the standard smart lists. What we've done, again, security first here, is that we've actually kind of segmented the payroll and human resources ones, so we don't install those by default. We want to very purposely make sure that you are installing it and saying, I want that list, and that you are granting access to it. So I wanted to show you that's some of those things. And again, your smart lists, right? If you built them in Smart List Builder, those will show up, so you can add those. Or if you built them in Baby Smart List Builder from Microsoft, you can do that. We can even hook into SQL tables and views, right, that are coming from your GP, either the company or the Dynamics databases. So we can do all those things. We can add lists, but then again, how do we lock it down so that we only have the right access that we need for that? And again, we can do this a number of ways. I might do it inside of here. I might start with a couple of things here. So this connector itself, I'm the only one that has access to it because I installed it. But if I wanted to give a team access, you can see I could give both of these teams if I wanted to. They could have access. So everybody that was in one of those teams would get access to the connector. So I'll start with that. But what I'm going to show you next is, again, just further locking down the security. It doesn't give you access to all the lists. So if this account transaction list, for example, if I pull this up and if we look at security on this, you'll see I'm the only one that has access to this list. So if I wanted to add a user, or again, my teams, right, we could add a team right through here. So we can choose to lock down exactly who should have access to this list. Even if you create a custom list that hooks into your through your gateway and pulls the GP data out, maybe combining a couple pieces of GP information, or maybe combining it with something external, it still has to go through that grant of access. So that, to me, is an important thing, is making sure that you only give access to the people that should have it. I'll show you one other thing, right? We have a dedicated security screen, and so what you can see in here, right, is we have all of our users, we have our teams, so there's where those 2 teams are coming from. If I look at this all team, for example, we can actually see who's a part of that. So it looks like there's a couple users that aren't part of that team. And then by connector, I can see, what access is in there. So our new one was Dynamics GP11. We can grant access. So this is a team level access, right? We're granting access to a team. So I could say, hey, they get access to all companies, or maybe they don't get access to this company. They would only get access to those two companies for multi-company purposes. I can also choose, again, individual lists. So like I said, this is a way that as an admin, you can grant access to, a lot more people and a lot more lists very, very simply instead of doing it one at a time. But again, be careful with some of those lists where it may make sense. And you can see, right, this is from the screen that we did. We only granted access to one list before. So just to show you that you have a lot of control over which lists that a user should have. Now, one question I get a lot is, okay, that's cool. Why aren't you guys just using Dynamics GP security? Well, what you got to understand is we're moving. We're not inside of the GP application anymore, right? We don't have dexterity and we don't have that engine running. This is basically a cloud application that is hooking into those smart lists and those tables directly. So we have basically there's two reasons, right? Is that one, we don't have the dexterity for the SQL for the security to basically have the same method of access. The second part, though, is that you got to realize PopDoc can do so much more than just hook into GP. And so this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because I could start creating lists that were hooking into, Salesforce data and GP, or dynamic CRM data and GP, or e-commerce coming from Shopify or WooCommerce or Magento, right? And combining that with my GP sales transactions. So that's where it gets interesting, because now you're working across multiple connectors, you have multiple security mechanisms, and that's why we had to basically provide another layer of security to make sure that you had control over that. All right. So let's wrap it up now here. Again, you are basically here. This is the fifth one. So if you've missed any of these other ones and want to go back, they are all published on both our YouTube and Vimeo channels. So that's a great way if you wanted to go look at one of these sessions that you had missed. And then again, there are two more coming up that are really focused more on, if you are maybe not going to be using GP for the next 10 years, right? If you have a plan over the next, months or years to come for what to do with that GP data and how PopDoc can help you with handling that history or legacy data as you move on to another system. So we'll be talking about that more next week. Okay, let's go and see if we have any questions out there. So if you do, I would encourage you to use the questions area of the GoTo training, or GoTo webinar, I should say. And we'll get to as many of these as we can here. So go ahead and get your questions in, and we'll answer what we can. All right. First one is, if we upgrade from GP 18.2 to 18.4, do we need to redo or get a new token? No, you won't have to do that for that upgrade, because basically it's the same access. Now, I will say this: if you came from GP 10 and we're going to 18.4, right, there potentially are some differences in the data model. So there could be a few things there, but basically if you're on GP 2010 all the way up to, like I said, 18.4 is the current latest, you'll be able to use any of those. And again, it won't matter if you went to 18.5 when that comes out, the gateway will still be there and you won't have to redo the token. Okay, good question. All right, another one asking if this will work with all the companies. Yeah, I showed you that briefly, that the data does work across companies. And so, yeah, the main thing, again, we're talking about security here, right? The main thing is that you must ensure that whatever user that you've chosen, the SQL user that connects to the database, has access to both the Dynamics databases and then each of the company databases that you would want to make available. Very good. I don't know if I have any other questions. Oh, okay, here's one. Is there any additional cost for the gateway? No, that's something that we've just made available to everybody. That if you have PopDoc, we're going to make that accessible to you so that you can securely give access to the GP data outside. So no additional cost. It's just a download that you can put in there once you have PopDoc. Okay, do we have documentation on how to set up PopDoc on a DMZ server? We don't have, there's nothing, I guess, specific in that KB article that we have on that. The key element there is that you must be able to connect to your SQL server from that DMZ. So that's one area when people are really locking down security internally even, and they put that web server on, outside, you still have to have a way of calling into that SQL server because it's inside of your network, but you still have to be able to call. If you can't connect to it, then obviously the gateway doesn't really move you any further along. Okay, I don't see any more questions out there. So thank you for attending, everyone. Again, if you do come up with some additional questions later, we have a number of ways you can contact us. You can send something to sales or support or our customer experience team, and we'd be happy to answer any of those things. Or again, we have a bunch of friendly account managers that work with your partners or yourself, and they would be happy to again help you along the journey and find the right people to get answers to any additional questions you have. So thank you for attending, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.